Hello, I'm Father Benedict Rochelle, and I am here today to give you the opportunity to meet a great Catholic philosopher. Some of you know her. We have a very, very interesting topic, and I'm going to just be the interviewer in this series of 13 talks on, well, I'll let her tell you. My guest today is Dr. Alice von Hildebrand, a very well-known Catholic writer, philosopher, and a great friend of mine.
It's an honor to be on the program with you, Father.
Thank you so much for saying that. Doctor, could you tell us what our series is going to be about?
Well, the title is Man and Woman, a Divine Invention. Because the more I think about it, the more I discover that it's something so beautiful that only God could have invented it.
It's, I think, important for all of you in the audience to recognize that this is a somewhat unusual series. You don't get real philosophers on television very often, and you don't get them on for a whole series. This will be 13 presentations. And Dr. von Hildebrand, who obtained her doctorate in philosophy in 1949, sorry to tell you I was still in high school, and who had taught at Hunter College in New York City for 35 years, is also the wife of the very distinguished Catholic philosopher and writer Dietrich von Hildebrand, who I'm going to ask her to tell you about. And we're going to follow a series of lectures, try to make each lecture. And these lectures fit in for a very good reason with the teachings of Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI on human relationship, if you will, the theology of the body. And in a few minutes, I'm going to tell you something very unusual about Dr. von Hildebrand and both of these popes. So, tell us a little bit about your husband.
You know, there's no doubt that from the moment of his conversion in 1914, faith and love for the Church was a primary factor in my husband's life. Now, already at 15, when he came from a very pagan background, because neither his father nor mother were practicing Protestants, he had an extraordinary philosophical talent. And at 15, when he read Plato, he said, that is my vocation, because of his passion and love for truth, number one, and his extraordinary gift for smelling errors and refuting them. And then he went to the university in Munich and met Max Scheler, who was a fallen away Catholic, but somehow, I mean fallen away because he was living in sin, but his teaching was still Catholic. And they had these long, long talks in cafe until 2 and 3 in the morning, you know, both two great minds. And one day, Scheler said to my husband, you know, the Roman Catholic Church has the fullness of truth. My husband was born and raised in Italy. Italian was his first language. And Italy remained truly the country of his love. And he had been raised there, never met a Catholic except maybe the maids that were not practicing Catholics, and was absolutely amazed. The Catholic Church has a fullness. What do you mean? No, Father, the answer will delight you. He said, yes, the Catholic Church produces saints. No, he was at that time 19 or 20 years old. He said, a saint? What is a saint? And Scheele, who had an extraordinary genius for sketching personalities, started talking about the beloved St. Francis of Assisi. My husband read his life. He was on the way to the church.
This is very impressive because St. Francis was neither a philosopher nor an intellectual, but he was a man of love and truth.
He was a saint.
He was a saint.
And for him, the discovery in a world of imperfections, in a world of sin, that holiness is possible, was a sort of intellectual tsunami. And from this moment on, his mind became fecundated by his faith.
Now, we're going to have to explain to our audience what fecundated means. It becomes enriched.
You know, Father, it is so that thanks to his faith, he started to see many things that could be seen, but because our eyesight has been darkened by original sin, we no longer see it.
This was an important part of your husband's thinking.
There's no doubt about it.
The effect of original sin on the human race, and we're going to come to that in your presentation.
They put up no resistance until federal, army was called, and then of course the putsch was defeated. Now, my husband got the news when he went to Mass on the 9th, early in the morning, and someone told him that Hitler had started this putsch, and then of course he was arrested, he was put in jail for 1 year, and then he wrote Mein Kampf. From the first moment, my husband smelled evil. And Father, you know, he said to me many times, God has given me a gift for which I have absolutely no merit. I smell evil and I smell heresy 10 miles off. It's not a particular, it's a gift of man.
I think our audience would be grateful if you told us what Hitler's reaction was to your husband.
Well, I mean, he was on the name of people to be condemned to death at the time of the first putsch, because he had already spoken about the evil of this tendency, you know, and people didn't pay much attention to it. Had he been caught on the day of the putsch, he would have been shot. And then afterwards, he was convinced, and wrongly so, that the movement was dead. And then he came back and he was horrified to see that Catholics intellectuals were so lame and, you know, so afraid to oppose it. They could have done it. Also the bishops, by the way, the German bishops were very, very weak to my husband's despair. And then, of course, in 1933, he took power. My husband decided immediately to leave the country because he said, as a teacher of ethics, I have to condemn the horror of anti-Semitism and the horror of the whole philosophy of Hitler. If I speak openly, as I feel that I should do, I'll be sent in a concentration camp. Overnight, he abandoned his house, he abandoned his job at the University of Munich. He left with 100 mark in his pocket and went to Italy. Now, his sister was living in the house where my husband was brought up and raised. It was a 16th century convent of the Frates Minimi that the older sister had inherited. She had married an American who became an Italian citizen. And he took refuge there. And he stayed there for 5 months and realized that there was only one politician in the whole of Europe conscious of the evil of Nazism. Someone, unfortunately, little known in the United States, a hero, but, you know, I'm absolutely convinced that his greatness is going to be this Engelbert Dollfuss.
Oh, Dollfuss, yes.
And he was the Chancellor of Austria. And my husband went over to him, offered his services, and said, you know, people, the intellectuals are blind to the horror of Nazism. And he simply said, you know, I would like to found a newspaper in which I try to show why this philosophy is evil from A, B, Z. And I would like to attack simultaneously Nazism and communism because they're brothers in evil. Many people became Nazis because they hated communism. Many communists became Nazis because they hated, and so on and so on. And Dollfuss was enchanted and said, I will support it financially. And 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, he published this newspaper called Christliche Ständestaat.
Which means?
Well, it was, he didn't choose a title, it was the federal Catholic state, you know, something of the sort. It was an unfortunate, bad title, but it was imposed upon him. It had a huge success. My husband wrote 67 articles attacking the philosophy of Hitler. To his joy, he found out that the German ambassador in Austria sent a personal telegram to Hitler saying, Dietrich von Hildebrand is the enemy #1. And you know, their existence, this telegram was found after the war. And I mean, of course, it is a glory to his name. Dollfuss was assassinated on the 25th of July, 1934. He was succeeded by a man who was a good man, but he was shy, and he wanted peace at all price, and started speaking about the union that exists between Germany and Austria, after all the same language and same culture, and no longer supported my husband's newspaper. He found himself in tremendously difficult financial situations and, you know, very much against his taste and his gift. He was running after money to try to keep the newspaper published, which he managed to do. By the way, he was the first person to recognize the value of Viktor Frankl. He received an article from a young Jew, aged 23, and my husband read it and said, you know, this is remarkable. He had been turned down by everybody. Who is Viktor Frankl? Nobody knew him. And he published the article in this Catholic newspaper. Was the first one who recognized his greatness.
I should tell our audience that Viktor Frankl has been recognized in the last 25, 30 years as an outstanding psychologist and psychotherapist. And he wrote a book that you may have heard of called Man's Search for Meaning. The idea being that we recover and keep our mental health if we have meaning in life. And Frankl discovered this while he was a prisoner in Auschwitz.
But Father, you know, it's still more beautiful than that. He had received a visa to go to the United States together with his young wife and paid a visit to his father. And one of the synagogues in Austria, in Vienna, had been destroyed by the Nazi because there was an underground of Nazis that were very powerful. And there was a piece of marble on his father's desk. And he said, look, my son, I've taken this piece of marble from the destroyed synagogue. And he looked at it, and it was written in Hebrew, honor your father and mother. Viktor Frankl went to the toilet, tore up his visa, and decided to remain. He was sent in a concentration camp. His young wife, his father, and his mother, all of them died except Viktor, who survived. And he said, because I knew I had a mission to teach people to look for meaning. He became incredibly famous. This book sold millions of copies. Father, I'll tell you something very beautiful. He came to the United States in the early 50s, and my husband gets a phone call, someone who says, I don't know if you remember me. You were the first one to publish or to recognize the value of my work. I'm Viktor Frankl. I wanted to thank you. Father, this is beautiful.
It's very beautiful.
Because someone who is capable of gratitude is a person who deserves our love and admiration.
And probably many of our audience have heard of Viktor Frankl, and particularly his book, Man's Search for Meaning.
It's a beautiful book.
But I want to get on with the story because we've got a whole big topic to discuss. Eventually, your husband came to the States and was a professor at Fordham University.
Yes, Father, but after a most extraordinary escape that you can imagine, because the Nazis invaded Austria on the 11th of March, 38, which happened to be my birthday. My husband got the news on the radio, and within an hour, he left his apartment, all his books, all his possessions, and took the last train leaving Austria for Czechoslovakia. The train was packed with Jews trying to escape at the last moment. But what the Nazis did not know is that my husband had a German passport and a Swiss passport, because his grandfather was a refugee who had left Germany because he had been condemned to death in 48 and became professor in Zurich. And he was a very famous economist and became honorary citizen of Switzerland. And as a result, all his children became, you can never lose a Swiss, you know, it's a sort of baptism. Once you have it, you can't lose it. This is why I have a Swiss passport too, which I do not use, because I married a Swiss citizen. And at that moment, the Nazis did not know that he had a Swiss passport, and he escaped. The next morning, on all the Austrian borders, there was a photograph of my husband and his wife and his son saying, these are traitors, they must be arrested. He went to Czechoslovakia, from there to Hungary, from there to Yugoslavia, and went to Switzerland, and stayed in Switzerland, living from the charity of Catholic, because he didn't have 1 cent. And one day I said to him, you know, after having lived in the glorious youth that you had in Munich, and didn't you suffer tremendously from this absolute poverty? And he looked at me in amazement. He said, no. For nothing in the world would have given up the joy of tasting the sweetness of charity.
Well, that's beautiful. And you were both professors here in New York City. Were you one of his students, I believe?
I was his student, Father, but he was teaching in a Catholic university, and I was teaching in a secular university. God sent me there for some mysterious reason. I never understood why, but I can only say it was very difficult, for the very plain reason that my colleagues was tremendously opposed to me because I was a Roman Catholic. And on top of it, I found out that whether you're Jewish or whether you're Protestant or whether you're an atheist, deep down in you there's a longing for truth. And when you meet someone who is sincere, and you know that deep down they love you and respect you, it is amazing the results that you obtain.
Oh, I know. I've met many of your students, a great many of your former students, and there's still a good many in touch with you. I should mention, she won't mention this, but the year that Dr. von Hildebrand retired from Hunter College, it had about 800 faculty members, I think, you were voted Teacher of the Year, I believe.
No, I was not voted by the faculty. I was voted
by the students.
Yes, because the students had to write a report on the quality of their teachers. You know, that was the things they obtained after the revolution. And competing with 850 professors, I had the highest average. And so Donna Shalala, the bosom friend of Hillary Clinton, had to give me the award at Madison Square Garden on graduation day. It was the funniest day of my life. You know, I call this God's sense of humor.
Well, you got the highest marks. Now, your husband passed away, and now you are working on publishing his very, very large literary output. Some of you would know Dr. von Hildebrand's most famous book, Transformation in Christ. That was his well-known book that I grew up with. And I think that you should tell us a little bit, you mentioned Pope Benedict and Pope John Paul, how their interests, particularly in human relationships and in the theology of the body, which we're talking about, were related to your husband's teachings.
Father, this is an extremely important question. Actually, it goes back to Pius XII. My husband wrote a book called Purity and Virginity that was published in Germany in 1927. Pacelli, who was nuntius in Berlin at the time.
Pacelli is Pope Pius XII.
he was nuntius in Berlin at the time. He received a copy of the book, and he wrote my husband a personal letter thanking him for the beauty of this book. My husband, when he became a Catholic, had the feeling that the presentation of the intimate sphere had been mostly related to sin.
What do you mean by the intimate sphere? Explain that to our audience.
You know, meaning to say, Father, I like to use the word intimate because the word sexual is so abused today. You know, I mean, after all, it is something that you share with animals, where when you say intimate, it is something which is very personal and presupposes human beings. And he had the feeling the presentation has been one-sided and imperfect. And after his conversion, he had such a vision of the beauty of the virtue of purity, which he had not seen when he was still a pagan. I mean, he had respect for the sphere, but never understood its meaning and its profundity. But Shelley wrote a personal letter of congratulations.
Pope Pius XII.
Yes. Unfortunately, he lost a letter when he left Vienna, but I mean, it must still be in the Vatican someplace. John Paul received all the books of my husband in German. He was fluent in German and knew the book. And there's no doubt that he had a profound influence on his theology of the body. Benedict XVI met my husband in Munich after the war in '48 and had all his books, and realizes that he has there a very special mission to try to show the beauty of God's plan when he created man, male and female, he created them. And I claim, Father, that it's something so amazing that it can only be a divine invention. It would never have entered a man's head to have two beings of equal dignity, but so complementary that the fullness of human nature is only to be found because man, he created male and female. In other words, a plenitude is to be found in both of them.
I hope that all of you in our audience have the frame of reference of Dr. Alice von Hildebrand and her very esteemed and deceased husband, Dr. Dietrich von Hildebrand. And his contribution way back in the 20s to a presentation of human relationships, of intimacy. The more popular word, as Dr. von Hildebrand mentioned, today is sexuality, but that has its problems, that word. And now we see two popes in a row, both of them men of incredible intellect, John Paul and Benedict XVI, writing and speaking about the theology of the body, about human love. The first encyclical of Pope Benedict XVI is on human love. Deus caritas est. God is love. And an important part of that encyclical is about human relationships and human love. Now, I hope you'll stick with us. If you haven't been to college, or you haven't been to college in many years, this will do you a lot of good. If you're not a Catholic, if you're Protestant or Jewish or Orthodox or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever, Muslim, listen, because we're all human beings, and we are all sprung from those first human beings with whom we are going to begin our next broadcast, Adam and Eve. Thank you so much, Dr. von Hildebrand, and we're looking forward, now that we've got our foundation in, to talking about the mystery of human relationships between man and woman. God bless. We'll see you in our next broadcast.